Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
After Dennis Rader would unalive the 4 members of the Otero family, he would take their family vehicle, drive it to a grocery store, and walk back to where he had parked his car. And after getting his car, he would actually go back to the Otero home, realizing that he had left a knife in the backyard. He would actually drive there and he would retrieve his knife and return home. 911 and police dispatchers would receive a call when the surviving children, Charlie, Danny, and Carmen, would come home from school, when they would quickly find their parents unalive in their bedroom. Thankfully, they would not find the unalive body of Joseph Jr. or Josephine in the basement. This, unfortunately, would be what the police would find when they would go to the 911 distress call that the children had made. The children would later recall in an interview and say that on that day it had felt like someone had taken their heart and ripped it through their chest. It actually would not be long for Dennis Rader to find his next unsuspecting victim, and that would be 21-year-old Catherine Bright. It's said that Rader would find Catherine Bright one day in town when Catherine Bright would actually be hanging out with some friends in town. And Rader would just find her and would decide that was the next person that he was going to unalive. It's around this time that Rader started giving his victims little code names, as before committing these crimes, he would try to plan everything out, and he would write these things down, and he would refer to Catherine Bright as Project Lights Out. So what Rader would start doing is he would begin stalking Catherine Bright to find out where she lived at, and just to see when she was most available at her home. On April 4th, 1974, Dennis Rader would decide to go through with his plan with Project Lights Out. He would do as he did with the Otero family. He would park his car within walking distance, and he would go over to the home of Catherine Bright. He'd walk to the back of the house and he would cut her phone cords. And he would break into the back door, as the back door was one of those doors that would have glasses on them. And he would actually punch a hole through the glass door, open the door, and break in through the home. After doing this, he would grab a broom and he would start sweeping up the broken glass that was laying on the ground. He wouldn't take much from his hit kit on this unaliving, as he would only bring with him the .22 pistol that he had brought with the Otero family and a .357 Magnum. He would also bring his knife on this one, and he would not drop it. After he would clean up the floor, he would sit on a chair and wait for Catherine Bright to come home. But Catherine would not be alone when she arrived home, as she was coming home with her brother, 19-year-old Kevin Bright. But Catherine and Kevin would come in the home, and this is where Dennis Rader would be found in the kitchen, and he would point a gun at them and tell them that he had just broken out from prison and he was looking for food and money and a vehicle to get away from town. This is a story that he would constantly give his victims, and I guess it was a way to kind of just drop their guard and make them think that they weren't going to be unalive that day. He would then place Kevin Bright in the bedroom and would bind him and restrict him to some headposts that he had brought with him from his hit kit. And then he would take Catherine Bright and he would tie her to a chair. It's at this point that Dennis Rader would try to walk into the room where Kevin was, and he would actually take a stereo and turn it up loud so that he couldn't aware any of the neighbors of what was going on. And he would walk into the bedroom, and it's at this point that he would pull out his .22 pistol, and he would attempt to try to shoot Kevin Bright and would only graze his face. It's at this point that Kevin would try to get out of the restraints, which he had been doing while Rader was tying up Catherine. He had actually restrained himself a little bit, and he was able to grab the .357 Magnum, or attempt to grab the .357 Magnum from Dennis Rader, to where Dennis Rader and Kevin Bright would fight over this gun, to which It is at this point that Dennis would point the .22 caliber pistol he had in his hand and would shoot Kevin Bright in the head. It's at this point that Dennis Rader would be asked by Catherine Bright what happened to her brother, to which he would say that he shot her brother in the head with a pistol. At this point that Dennis Rader would say that Catherine Bright became extremely hysterical and a fight would ensue between herself and Dennis. Dennis Rader would later recall and would say that Catherine Bright fought like a hellcat. He would try to asphyxiate Catherine Bright, but would find that she was way too strong to be asphyxiated, so he would just resort to taking a knife and would stab her over 11 times in the abdomen. It's around this time that Rader would hear a noise coming from the other room, and he had not been successful in unaliving Kevin as he had thought, as it did not unalive Kevin, and he was wrestling through the room trying to get out of the house. Panicking, Rader would go into the kitchen and grab the keys that would go to the truck that Catherine owned, and he would run out to the truck, but unfortunately he would not be able to start the truck, and it is at this point that he would drop the keys and he would run over to his car. Catherine would actually not be unalive when Rader left, and it's at this point that Kevin would return to call the police, and he had not been successful in cutting the phone lines as he had thought he was. And the police came over and would send an ambulance trying to help Catherine Bright, but unfortunately she would succumb to her injuries while in surgery. Kevin Bright will go down as one of the few remaining survivors that met with BTK. Dennis Rader would not commit another crime for the next 3 years, and he would commit his next crime on March 17th, 1977. 24-year-old Shirley Ruth Relford. Now, originally, Shirley was not the original victim that Rader had picked out, but on the day that he was going to commit the crime, he would find that that particular person was not home. He would be very aggravated, and he would quickly start looking around for another victim, where he would find Shirley Relford. And one of the ways that he would get into contact with her is he would walk up to her son, Steve Relford, and he would walk up to her son and would hand out a picture of what was a picture of Dennis Rader's wife and daughter, and would ask if they identified the women in the picture as he was looking for them. Steve would direct Dennis Rader to his mother's house, and it's at this point that he would pull out the gun and tell Shirley that, once again, he was an escaped convict and he was there to get money and food and shelter. Shirley would also be babysitting some kids, so she would take Steve Relford and the other children and put them into a bathroom, and Dennis Rader would ask her to help barricade the door. Rader would assure Shirley that the kids were fine because he had put toys and blanket inside the bathroom. This is where Dennis Rader would take Shirley into the bedroom, to where it said as he was tying her up that she would vomit on the floor. And it's during the unaliving process that she would ask Rader for a glass of water. This is probably before she knew that she was going to be unalived. So he would place a plastic bag over her head and tie a rope around her neck and unalive her by asphyxiation, as he had done with the Ontario family. Meanwhile, the kids were banging on the door, screaming to be let out. Rader would say in a later interview that it was part of his original plan to unalive the children after unaliving Shirley. But luck would be on the children's side that day. As Dennis Rader would approach the bathroom to unalive the children, the phone would ring. This in turn would actually scare Dennis Rader, and he would decide to not unalive the children and leave the house, which would not take long for Rader to start planning out his next murder.